done, know that I'd still be here when the day is done. So come a little bit closer, and I'll tell you what I feel inside. You know I'm gonna wait on you. I'm gonna wait on you. You know I'm gonna wait on you. Yes, I'm gonna wait on you. No one's gonna love you like I do. So glad that I found you. You're the missing piece, the last piece of the puzzle. I'm finally at ease. So when times are rough and the promises we made just seem so hollow and weak, and we're about to break, we have to remind ourselves, 'cause we know how we feel inside. You know I'm gonna wait on you. Ain't over till it's over. I'm gonna wait on you. I'm gonna love it till it's gone. You know I'm gonna wait on you. And the weight that's on your shoulder, I'm gonna carry that for you. So hear me when I say, no one's gonna love you like I do. I'm gonna wait on you. I'm gonna wait on you. I'm gonna wait on you. You know I'm gonna wait on you. And the weight that's on your shoulder, yes, I'm gonna carry that for you. So hear me when I say, no one's gonna love you like I do.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show.
It's Tuesday, August 17th, 2021. Thank you so much for joining us. This has already been a tumultuous week. Around the world, we're watching major stories unfold between what's happening in Afghanistan to the devastation in Haiti, and right here in the United States with the uncontrolled spread of COVID-19 infecting so many children as children return to school. It has been a lot for our team. And so we're taking a day so that we can catch our breath and reset. And so we're going to leave you with today our very best, some of the very best from our show, The Benjamin Dixon Show, Like It or Not, and On the Clock with Georgia Ford.
Good morning, Ben.
What are we looking at today?
Black economics. I think regardless of where you are in the country, we need to keep front and center our finances and the wealth gap. In addition to that, we know that Evanston, Illinois has been leading the country with their reparations bill. They're the first to pass a city program of reparations, but not everyone is happy with it. And the reason being is because their reparations program has some contingencies. They're saying that, yes, we'll give Black residents who have faced housing discrimination $25,000, but that money has to go to home improvement costs, down payments, mortgages, so it's not just like, here's your reparations. It's here's some money and this is what you have to do with it. Ben, do you think that reparations should be contingent, or should folks be able to get reparations payment and spend it how they like?
Oh, you went for the gusto right away. Like, oh, I like to build. I like to build and make my case. But I think by the end of today's episode, we're going to find the case that reparations should be distributed to the people, and what they do with it is going to be their business. I think I think you have set the thesis for today's episode. So let's have that conversation.
We're going to bring in PJ Hill. He is the vice president of the NAACP in Minneapolis, also a financial expert, and Anthony Galloway. He is a national podcast host as well as faith leader. PJ, I know in terms of the financing piece, you'll have a lot to add to this conversation, and Anthony, more of the historical context of just, how and why we got to this point in America. But PJ, I'll start with you. Why should we have reparations, and to what extent should we be able to have the freedom to spend it how we like?
Thank you, Georgia, for having me on. I think, the number one reason we need reparations because the way wealth is passed in this nation is through real estate. And when you look at it, back in 1865, when General William Sherman asked, what does a Black man need to be successful in this country? Garrison Ford, who was the leader of the Black people at that time, a pastor, said, we need land. And when you look at it, that is what frees us as people. If you want to talk about creating generational wealth, land is the number one way you do that. And because America systemically has restricted us from growing that way, that's why we need reparations. And reparations need to come in the form of real estate and being the freedom to be able to do that, to be able to grow, to be able to pass that from generation to generation.
Absolutely. Take a listen. We have a clip from the president of the Greenwood Chamber of Commerce. He sits over Black Wall Street currently. His name is Freeman Culver. And of course, he's been impacted by what happened in Tulsa, which reignited a lot of questions and concerns around reparations. Take a listen to what he had to say about reparations.
I mean, social justice is great. We need that. But you will never have social justice until you have economic justice. Just this call for reparations is great. But what we need is funding. We need it continually.
And so when you think about funding continually without contingency, right? Especially coming from his standpoint and being over the Chamber of Commerce, Black Wall Street, which used to be 40 blocks of Black wealth, now reduced to one block, right? It is, I think, reasonable to consider why these residents in Evanston, Illinois, are a little frustrated that the city, yes, while they're leading the nation and being the first to have a reparations program, maybe they didn't quite get it right. Maybe they kind of rushed to market too fast, trying to lead the way, trying to be the pilot program without really thinking it through. Or what we oftentimes see with city government is they hold these engagement sessions, these listening sessions that no one seems to come to get feedback on how to do things. And while I think they thought they may have engaged the community clearly, the response that we're getting from Evanston residents about this, I mean, they're going as far as to say that this is fake reparations. It's not even real reparations. Wow. You have Kristen Mullen, who is an author. She says this is a housing voucher program, not reparations, and calling that does more harm than good. And it's a little frustrating because I feel like people on the other side of this are saying, well, hey, you're getting 25 grand, be happy about it. Why are you complaining? You know, what more do you want? But then even looking at what community organizer Sebastian Knowles had to say about it, Sebastian says the beneficiaries of this program would be those who initially did the harm of redlining here in Evanston. You know, and so when you put it in that context, right, here's $25,000. You can only put it towards home improvements. You can only put it as a down payment or closing costs, right? And putting it in that context of saying now, instead of giving Black people $25,000 to start their own business or to invest in stock or to invest in their child's college fund, you're saying here's $25,000, but you have to give it to white developers, basically.
Yeah.
And so I think that conclusion by Sebastian of here is $25,000 to stimulate the beneficiaries of redlining.
You know, if you don't mind, let me jump in there. Because I see the whole picture now. I think I see the whole picture. And Anthony, I would love to get you to jump in on that. So basically they're saying we're going to do something good for you, but only if it recirculates back out to the very people who harmed you. Right.
Exactly.
They're only going to give you so much because they know as soon as it comes in, they want to specify it's got to go out the door to the very people who are connected to the root of the problem. Anthony, what are you seeing in your world?
Well, I think it's very fitting that we start with the field order given by General Sherman. This is where we get our misnomer about 40 acres and a mule. We you know, that fake reparations again. And I think this is actually connected. I mean, I deal with historical patterns. You know, there were some AME church ministers in that room, and yes, they centered on land. But we have to connect some dots. So first, this is the second time that Black leaders were gathered, so-called Black leaders, to speak for everybody by a national leader. President Lincoln tried the same thing, and when we said no, we're not about to repatriate back to Africa, he stopped and went to talk to other folks, and that's where you have the Team of Rivals book. But then General Sherman comes and gives a toothless order, the field order for 40 acres and a mule, again, you know, not connecting to a national connection, not connecting to communities across, but saying, oh, I think this is a good idea, and let me jump on this here. But it had no teeth, it had no backbone, and of course, as political leaders change, so too. So I think, you know, what you bring forward here, you know, this attempt in Evanston again is something local that doesn't necessarily address the national. So that's the first. You know, there's some historical patterns here. The other piece is you bring in particularly redlining. Like I'm here in Minnesota. Minnesota is one of many places across the nation that had racially restrictive covenants for years, disbarring Black folks from even moving into almost every first tier suburb here in Minnesota had a racially restrictive covenant that would not allow people of color in particular to move. I mean, this is captured in James Lowen's book, Sundown Towns, where he talks about one of those, you know, and how even to this day, even though surrounded contiguously by cities that have diversified 20 and 30% in these initial sundown towns, they remain 99% white. So there are mechanisms in place that are connected to all of these patterns. So as you talk about the developers in this drop in the bucket given to, I think it's like 16 residents to start, and then all of a sudden who I have to pay ends up being the same folks that go back. Is it reparations for us, or is it reparations continuing from the reparations that were given to Southern planters who, quote unquote, lost?
Right.
So there's a lot of historical patterns here.
Georgia, that's all. I appreciate the conversation, and I appreciate you bringing these voices, Anthony and PJ. Thank you so much. You guys had so much insight and so much. You helped us have this conversation. Couldn't have had it without you. Thank you guys so much.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you.
This morning, we're going to take a look in Michigan, where they're trying to do what they can to create equity throughout our healthcare systems. In Michigan, they have announced that now implicit bias training will be a requirement for all healthcare professionals. It's something that was announced by the Governor Gretchen Whitmer, who says he wants to do this in effort to combat racial disparities in healthcare. Now, exactly how will this be regulated? The Department of Licensing is going to require upfront, in order for you to get your license, that you take a 2-hour implicit bias training course. And then each year after that, when you renew, you'll have to go back for an additional 1 hour of training. Oh, we've heard a professor from Harvard, the professor of public health, Dr. David Williams, talk about just how important it is to combat this. Take a listen.
The typical healthcare provider, I had many talks to medical, nursing, and other health professional groups after the Institute of Medicine report came out. And the typical healthcare provider in the United States would say, I would never do that. I would never provide less pain medication to a black patient than a white patient. Whereas the evidence is clear that black patients get less pain medication with similar levels of conditions. So the first thing is to realize that could be me, and that people who have implicit biases are not bad people. They are just reflecting the culture and the beliefs that they were raised with.
Morning, Vice President of Children's Minnesota, and Brandon Jones, who is a psychotherapist and professor as well. I know both of you have really studied professionally the impacts that these racial disparities are not just having within the clinics and the hospitals, but how they're impacting people's day-to-day lives and their health. James, I'll start with you. Why is it important for something like this to be mandated by law?
I think it's important. First of all, good morning, Georgia. Good morning, Brandon. And congrats, Brandon, on your new role. So I look forward to working with you at Children's Mental Health, first and foremost. I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One is it's about quality of care for our patients and families. And if we want to have quality of care, we have to make sure that nothing is getting in the way. So if implicit biases are getting in the way of proper pain medication for sickle cell patients like my daughter, Teresa Ann Burrows, I want to make sure that we address that by implicit bias training. If implicit bias training can also get out of the way of police and or security being called on Black and brown families because they may raise their voice a little bit to a doctor or a nurse, but not arguing, not argumentative, but it's something that our nurses or practitioners haven't seen. I want implicit bias training. If we're not giving what we need to do as far as addressing the social determinants of health from food security and through employment opportunities and through housing, if we're not doing those things to our needs of our families, I want to make sure that we address it by not only implicit bias training, but creating access. But I would be remiss if I didn't say this. Systemic racism is the foundation or the cause of all of this. So we can't just do implicit bias training on and by itself. We have to have and have to address the systemic issues of racism within the system in order to make sure that implicit bias is going to make a difference.
Absolutely. And Brandon, with your area being more in the mental health realm, are you seeing these same disparities show up in your profession as well?
Absolutely. And it definitely affects the way that people are diagnosed from a mental health and a chemical health level. Some people are misdiagnosed, some people are overdiagnosed, and that affects treatment. That affects what type of medications you may be offered. It affects what type of placements you may be offered. It affects how insurance is charged. And we know that those are all barriers that show up in Black and brown communities across the United States. So this is a major problem. I don't think that 2 hours of training is enough. I think this needs to be a continuous thing. And even given the pushback just to the 2 hours initially and the hour afterwards every year is very eye-opening and eyebrow raising. And we have to be able to say, what is this really about? Because everybody has bias, and we should be, as professionals, we should be addressing those bias so it doesn't get in the way of our care, especially because a lot of us professionals swear oaths within our profession to make sure that people get high standards of care. And unfortunately, people find that, dealing with racism, talking about culture, ethnicity, and just race in general is a struggle, and it shouldn't have to be a struggle. There's one more thing that I want to mention. It also has an impact on the patients or the clients, because they feel that, they see what's going on, they see that they may be getting treated differently, and that affects what? That affects our ability to pass on information. We might not have a primary care physician or something of that nature, and we start to look at the healthcare system as an object in our way, and we don't get the best possible care for ourselves, which ultimately affects that social determinants of health, which affects our lifestyle and our lifespan.
Brandon, you said it's not enough. Right. It's not enough to simply just do 2 hours of implicit bias training. And I know that, James, you speak nationally. You speak to hospitals all around the world about different ways to combat racial disparities within the healthcare system. So if 2 hours of implicit bias training is not enough, what are other things that we can do? And then I think from a patient standpoint, right, like at some point, all of us have to go to the hospital. And I just feel like most of us who are Black or brown, we're at a place in our nation where we are in fear to go to the hospital. Some of us, I've heard this saying, doctors are to Black women what police are to Black men. And so I do think that Brandon brings up a very good point here of just like, 2 hours of training and everything will be okay. But we're still seeing these disparities persist, even in hospitals in cities and states where this has already been implemented. And so James, I'm just wondering if you know of other things that people can do in order to really start making some headway at eliminating these disparities in our healthcare system.
Right, and that's the 20 million, 30 million, 50 million, billion-dollar question. But I'll give you my 2-cent thoughts. One, as Brandon said, you got to embed it in the system of the work that we do. So hospitals are about quality of care and also safety. So if someone was misdiagnosing folks or putting in a blood draw and doing damage to patients and families, we would address it through what we call safety and learning reports. People can report that, we address it, we change the system. At Children's, we're doing the same thing with emotional harm. So if there's something happening in the treatment of our patients and families that deal with emotional harm, and sometimes that's racism, sometimes it's gender bias, sometimes it's other types of bias, we address that. You can fill out a safety learning report. Now, we need to get better because right now, those reports are filled out by employees about patient issues. We want to address them through employees being able to do the same. We'll take those reports, address it like we would a safety issue, get all the players involved that need to be, and address it by changing the system in order to address the quality of care. So that's one area, that safety learning report. Another is we partner with the Lina healthcare system, and this amazing Black woman, Dr. Lisa Saul, heads up the Mother Baby Center for us. And what she did recently, and what we did collectively as Children's and Lina, is revamp the entire way in which we care for patients and families, but especially Black moms. As you said before, Black maternal health is abysmal in the sense that we are killing Black babies on a regular basis and no one's alarmed about it. We are making sure that Black mothers are scared of coming to the hospital to have births because of our treatment. Well, she said, we're going to change that. She has a daughter, I have a daughter. We are on this collective journey together by addressing the system, by building into the system, not only implicit bias training, but making sure that we're partnering with agencies with Brittany Wright, agencies with other folks as well who are addressing Black maternal health care and partnering with them, because if we don't know something that's occurring, we need partners to making sure that's happening. We also went out and we did some marketing changes to how we were recruiting and getting Black families in. We also hired a young Black woman to do those marketing materials, to do that collective work about connecting to community. So that's another thing, partner with the right agencies and partners. We also partner with the African American Leadership Forum, which in Minnesota is an organization doing great work in community. We're not community at Children's. We don't know community. I do personally, because I've been here a while, but others don't. So we're partnering with those right people. So that's another thing. The other thing is to call it what it is. It's racism. So don't call it implicit bias and say that, yeah, we're going to do implicit bias, but George Floyd was murdered 12 blocks from Children's Hospital, but we're talking about implicit bias. We're going to do implicit bias, but we have families that are concerned about racism and how a family could be able to say to someone, I don't want the Black people to take care of me, and somebody to take that seriously and not address it in a comprehensive, systemic way. We got to admit that our systems have failed. And if we don't admit that, we will end up doing what we do now. We're trying to get COVID vaccines to our families, Black families in Minnesota. I think they're receiving them about 45% rate, whereas white people are getting them at 70%, because what you mentioned earlier, their fear of the healthcare system, lack of trust of the healthcare system, lack of partnership. We can't do it the same way that we've done it for everyone else. So I think those are some of the areas, Georgia. I have many more that I can think of and talk about, but partnering with organizations like Brandon, we have a mental health crisis for our kids, and especially our kids of color. Why would I try to go out there and do it on my own? I'd say, hey, Brandon, let's partner together. How do we do that for inpatient healthcare with our pediatric physicians?
Absolutely. And I think about how can patients protect themselves? Like, we put so much faith in this system and these entities and corporations. But before we go into that, I want to bring Benjamin Dixon into the conversation. Ben, I know that this is something that you're extremely passionate about, and having a family yourself being impacted. What are your thoughts as we're thinking through all of this and talking through all of this?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm taking all this in because it's just confirmation of the reality. Sometimes we feel isolated in these experiences as Black people, Black men specifically. We feel isolated, but so it's good to have the conversation and to understand that we're not the only ones that are going through this on both sides, where there's a fear of the system, the healthcare system, because of historical things. But then there's also the reality of how we've been treated when we go to these doctors' offices, and how women are treated when they go, Black women specifically, and the disparity. So it's really important that we have these conversations nationally so people can understand how connected we are in these experiences. My question is regardless of what came first, the chicken or the egg, the offense or the fear, how do we successfully unravel it? And do you think that this type of diversity and inclusion styled kind of flavored attempt that's happening in Michigan, do you think that's a decent first step?
I do. I think it is a step. I don't want to say it's a decent first step. It is a step, but really the work is in community. The work is in getting adequate information to folks who do not access these services all the time, and making sure that people feel connected to these healthcare systems. Primary care physicians are extremely important. Unfortunately, so many Black people go to emergency rooms for their healthcare for things that they should be just getting checked on a regular basis. So we have to re-educate the community and invite them into these spaces so that there is a sense of trust, because that trust was broken a long time ago. It continues to be broken when we have negative experiences in these healthcare systems. Emergency rooms are great, but they're not there for your primary care needs. And unfortunately, that's how we have accessed healthcare.
That's right.
Yeah. And Benjamin, to answer your question, it's a first step. Whether it's decent or not means it has to be coupled with something else. So at Children's, my other step is I have a 34% hiring goal for all of our hires will be people of color. So every year I'm gonna have 34% people of color come in. So my workforce will look differently than it has before. So when you come in as a family of color, you will see people who look like you. I also have that for physicians and nurses as well, because we are abysmal when it comes to that. I also have a supplier diversity goal. We're going to spend at least 20 to 30% of our monies with Black Latino, Native, Asian folks on a regular basis. So we're going to invest in the community as well. That's another step in addition to the training. Training to me is like the last step. Like training is great. You can do some training. If people feel good about that 2-hour training, like, ooh, that was great, it's something wrong, because you shouldn't feel good about 400 years of oppression. You shouldn't feel good about racism that occurs daily. You shouldn't be cool about hearing about Tuskegee for the first time or Henrietta Lacks for the first time and being like, oh man, I enjoyed that training. Sometimes I don't want you to enjoy it. I want you to feel what you feel about it and then say, I'm going to do more than just training. I'm going to hire some folks. I'm going to do some partnerships. And I'm going to do some things that invest in the community as well. My favorite is, if a company says we're going to do something different about George Floyd because racial inequity happened. We saw it on TV. When you look up and they're spending 0.1% of their budget in the Black community. That's not doing anything. That's lip service. So I'll get on my soapbox, Benjamin, but I'm real passionate about what we got to do other than just training as well.
Ooh.
Well, and if you guys are just joining us, that is Vice President of Children's Minnesota, James Burrows, as well as psychotherapist and Professor Brandon Jones. You guys, there has been a lot of violence across the country. Violence in terms of police killings, violence in terms of white supremacists acting against Black people, like we saw here in Minneapolis just over the weekend, where a white supremacist drove his car into a protest for Winston Smith and killed a woman. We're also seeing violence, community violence, where it's Black people shooting and killing other Black people. And I'm very concerned about the mental health of our country, especially the Black community, in light of all of this violence that's perpetuating against us from basically, it feels like everywhere. It just feels like there's no refuge. There's no safe space. And so, Brandon, I want to pick your brain about that. But to give a little more context, Deanna Marie is actually the woman who was killed over the weekend. If you take a look at this photo, I believe we have it on file. You can actually see the damage from the vehicle. It's going about 100 miles per hour when it crashed into the group of folks. And it's okay if we don't have it. We can post it later. But, there was a ton of folks who were on the scene when this happened, including a lot of young people. You're talking people between the ages of 16 to 24 who witnessed this horrific violent crime, and also who, now are internalizing that. How do we identify when we're having mental health issues, and what should we do about it, Brandon? If we're seeing, hey, I'm processing all of this stuff, and maybe I'm not doing a good job at processing it, being exposed to that much trauma. How should we identify when maybe we're in need of mental health services?
Yeah. Some traditional telltale signs that we're in need of some traditional mental health services is when our behaviors start to shift, our day-to-day behaviors and functioning start to shift dramatically. So things like sleep. So you may get 6 to 8 hours of sleep typically, but now your sleep has significantly reduced to like 3 hours, and you're up watching live streams and catching up on news and things like that. Or maybe you sleep a little bit too much, or your appetite sways in one direction or another. Those are usually telltale signs that something's not wrong. And you can't go to work, or you can't go to school, you can't get out of bed. These are some of the typical things that you have so much mental anguish happening for you that it's time to make a shift. But there are also in a lot of communities where folks have been going at that rate for so long that it has become normalized, and you can't tell that anything is different. And when usually what happens in those situations is other people around you start to point at you and ask you, you good? Like, what's happening? What's going on? And we have to receive those signals and those messages to say, maybe I'm not all good. Maybe I am overworking myself, and maybe I should go speak to someone and get a little bit of additional help. And those are usually some of the telltale signs. But just in general, we are being bombarded with so much different, just messages on Black pain, Black trauma, and it is overwhelming. And I think that we need to do as much as we can to, limit those signals and those things that come into us, because it is overwhelming. And just like this young woman who was out, protesting another heinous crime that we've had here in the Twin Cities, unfortunately lost her life because someone was not able to self-regulate and handle their own hatred and figure out other ways to deal with that pain that they may be going through. So they let it out on a group of folks. And unfortunately, we lose another life. At some point, we have to look at this as a mental health crisis and a public health crisis that that this violence is happening from so many different angles. It's not just black on black crime. It is also white folks who are getting to a point where they don't know what else to do but to lash out. And we have so many different examples of that.
I know we could go deeper, but we are on the clock. So I will let you two get to work. Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation as well.
Well, thank you, Georgia. And have us back. We'll
absolutely.
come back and talk again. So
don't be surprised.
Like It or Not with Benjamin Dixon starts now.
I'm excited to be joined by Congressman Ro Khanna, who has served as a U.S. representative to Congress from California's 17th Congressional District since 2017. One of the most vocal members of Congress when it comes to a particular situation that I have been following intensely, the Saudi war with Yemen. Congressman Khanna, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Benjamin, thank you. And thank you for having me on to talk about the humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you started and you phrased it exactly like that. The reason I talk about it and I wanted you to come on is because there's not enough people talking about what's happening in Yemen and America's direct responsibility for what's going on. Give us your thoughts in general about the complicitness of America with what's happening in Yemen and as it pertains to how we should fix what's happening there.
Benjamin, it is a horrific situation. 16 million Yemenis face the possibility of starvation or a famine. This could be the worst famine if it's not prevented in modern history. My passion for it came because my grandfather was a part of Gandhi's independence movement and jailed for India's independence. And in 1943, there was a famine in West Bengal, which was the previous worst famine. And I said, how can we possibly have that happen in the 21st century? Unfortunately, America was complicit since 2015. We have been refueling the Saudi planes that have been bombing the Yemenis people. We have been providing intelligence to the Saudis that have been bombing the Yemenis people. And we finally, President Biden said, we're going to stop the offensive support. But the reality is that the bombing continues. We need to do far more. The situation on the ground has not improved.
You said specifically to that, you did recognize Joe Biden's attempt and his move in a positive direction, but you said he needs to go further. You said we need further clarification on what specific military support will be ending. And just as importantly, what support Biden will still plans to provide for the Saudis. Could you unpack that? Because I think that is very significant.
Well, Benjamin, what the administration has said, and I give them credit, is that we're not going to participate in any offensive strikes that Saudis may take. But what the Riyadh says all the time is, well, they're just taking defensive action. They're being attacked from Yemen. And so they're going and striking villages or striking people in Yemen to take defensive preventive action. I don't think the U.S. should be part of that. This is not something that we ought to be involved in. And we ought to further demand that the Saudis and UAE and frankly, Iran all end any funding into Yemen or foreign interference. The war is not going to end if you have these powers continuing to pour in money into the region. We need to make sure that this is an internal civil war first and have resolution.
One of the main reasons I focus on this is twofold: the international relations, the foreign policy aspect, and this is what you're speaking to. But could you also speak to why an average American who, and this is no insult to us because a lot of us can pick out Yemen on the map, why should the average American who really probably maybe didn't even know this was happening, why should we care about the crisis that we as American citizens have some responsibility for, if no other reason but through our taxes?
Because we're a nation founded on a belief that human dignity doesn't end at our borders. Every individual has dignity. And this is a horrific humanitarian crisis, arguably the worst in the last 50 years. I mean, you literally have, if you read about it, young kids starving, women and children being bombed. And we have the chance to act to prevent millions of deaths. That's really what's at stake. If the situation continues, the UN has said millions of people, millions of children could die. And it's not that this was happening without our involvement. We actually facilitated this war. We provided the Saudis with the equipment, with the logistics, with the intelligence to bomb Yemen. So we have a responsibility to end it and to help rebuild Yemen if you care at all about basic human rights.
Basic human rights and basic human life. The geopolitics of this is actually something that we don't have enough time to delve into today. But could you briefly speak to the complexity of our relationship with Saudi Arabia and why we continue to support them in this fashion when we see very clearly what they are doing? And I mean, we can really go all the way back decades and talk about some of these issues. But this one specifically, why is the United States of America allowing ourselves to remain in bed with a regime that is waging a war that is causing this level of humanitarian crisis?
Well, Benjamin, you asked the central question. We should not have this kind of relationship with the Saudis. We don't need it. We did at one point need Saudi Arabia for oil, but frankly, as we become more energy independent, that dependence is no longer there. Second, we don't need to have as many bases and troops there. I mean, one of the things I find so frustrating is the constant view that, okay, our troops are being attacked, so let's send more troops into an endless battle in the Middle East. No, let's start pulling those troops out. These are not our wars. And third, we need to not view the Saudis as sort of a balance of power check on Iran. Instead, America should try to extricate ourselves from a region that's only 3.5% of entire global GDP. It's costing us lives. It's costing us our morality. It's costing us trillions of dollars.
It's costing us our morality. I thank you for phrasing it that way. Congressman, you are a progressive. You fight for progressive issues. What could you say to people who have a fear, progressives in particular, this fear that once a congressperson is elected and they go to represent our progressive values, there's a latent fear in the back of our minds that somehow you all will be co-opted by the system because there is a massive system up there. Could you speak to that?
Well, Budget, I'm going to be honest. It's a legitimate fear. When you go into Congress, you have so many competing balance issues. You got to think, is someone going to support my legislation? Do I get on the wrong side of the White House? Do I get on the wrong side of the leadership? So what I say is keep us honest, keep pushing us. Don't make any elected official the savior. The saviors in American politics comes from outside the system. People like Dr. King, Frederick Douglass. Be the movement that forces members of Congress to make the change that we need.
Congressman Ro Khanna, 17th District of California, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Benjamin, for giving me the chance.
I am excited to be joined by Senator Nina Turner, who was an Ohio state senator from 2008 to 2014. Senator Turner describes herself on Twitter as a wife, mother, sister, host of Hello Somebody podcast, which I am a proud supporter of, a professor. Senator Turner, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Oh, Dixon, it's so good to be here with you and Rebecca this morning, and DJ just lighting it up. I mean, I need to start my morning with like it or not.
Oh, wow.
Thank you, Senator Turner. I appreciate you.
It is, and it's a joy to have you here with us to experience this. Listen, we've talked a lot. We've talked a lot over the years with all of your work for the progressive movement. You really stepped out and quite honestly took it on the chin on behalf of progressive values, particularly progressive values that intersect with the Black community. Could you just tell us about not only your race, but particularly the challenges that you're having in your race as a Black progressive and unapologetically Black and unapologetically progressive?
Yeah, thank you for that, Dixon. And I do appreciate our conversations over the years. I mean, you are such a champion in the independent media space, which we really need, and other brothers and sisters. So I'm glad to see you and Rebecca and DJ just stepping up and stepping out in new ways to keep people informed. It's very hard. It's hard when you go against the grain. And we know this. We know this from a historic perspective when you're fighting against the status quo. And it is especially hard when you are a Black woman doing it, because people don't necessarily, the system itself doesn't respect our agency. The culture does not respect the agency of Black women. That's another show for another time. But I am glad to be following in the tradition as we move from Black History Month to Women's History Month, baby. I'm glad to be in the tradition of women like Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, unbought and unbossed. So if people want to know what kind of Democrat Sister Turner is, check them notes right there. Clear my throat. I am a Shirley Chisholm, Congresswoman, the Honorable Shirley Chisholm, Democrat, unbought and unbossed. I am a sharecropping, standing up for voters, forming a new freedom, Democratic Freedom Party in Mississippi with my poor white sisters and brothers type of Democrat, Fannie Lou Hamer type of Democrat, where you guys remember that President Johnson, he was so afraid of that. He was about to he called a press conference to try to stop her message from getting out. Yeah. But all he did was to help it spread even more, baby. That's the kind of Democrat I am. And I'm gonna go ahead and throw in a little FDR for my other folks. Little President FDR, we know that the New Deal was not perfect, but what I will say about it is it gave us a foundation. And I loved it when he told the status quo of his day, I welcome your hatred, because we're going to step up. And that's what I'm doing. And so, yeah, they're going to come at me worse than if I was a Republican, because that is what the status quo will do. Anybody that's elected to the Congress, whether it's the House of Representatives or the Senate, every move that we make impacts the entire United States of America, baby. I am running for justice. I am running on an opportunity agenda.
Clip it all, because that's the campaign right there. Hey, look, Dwayne, producers, clip it all, because we need that.
Oh my goodness. I remember when they kept you out of the 2016. They locked you out of the 2016 DNC. I remember when you were blacklisted, right? And meanwhile, now other folks who fought for the same things, other people with a different melanin count fought for the same thing that you fought for, but they were not kept out the way that you were kept out. You were individually targeted on so many different levels that were palpable and real. And so what is it about being a Black unapologetic progressive that triggers the Democratic establishment in a way that it's like all hands on deck to stop this Black woman?
Oh my God, Dixon, that is inquiring minds want to know. What I will say that is wrapped in the DNA of this nation, whether people want to admit it or not, and we need some real truth and reconciliation, baby, in this country on multiple levels. That's political, that's social, that's economic, it's environmental, it's racial, it's there. And so, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Minister Malcolm X warned us of what we're dealing with in this country. So did Congresswoman Barbara, I always quote Congresswoman Barbara Jordan too. What the people want is very simple. They want an America as good as its promise. And that's really what I'm fighting for. You don't have to agree on how to get there. But when somebody is fighting for health care, because we have almost 100 million people in this country who are either underinsured and uninsured. I mean, just with the unemployment rates alone, 12 million folks lost their health insurance because it's commodified and attached to a job. You might disagree on how to get there, but you want to attack me for that? I'm standing up saying that Lord Jesus. Yeah, we need to cancel student debt. We need to cancel student debt. And not only will student debt help all of our brothers and sisters, no matter how they identify, it will especially help the Black community. And let me go and drill down into that a little deeper. It will help the sisters. Black women carry the largest amount of student debt in the United States of America. So if you want to get closer to reparations, baby, let's just go on and start by canceling student debt and stop talking about, I'm going to do $10,000 here, maybe $50,000 here. Oh, no, but you went to a private college. No, let's just cancel it all. We don't hear that kind of foolishness when it comes to giving $1 trillion worth of tax breaks to the ultra wealthy in this country. But when it comes time to put a down payment on Main Street, somebody, then we got all of the excuses in the world. So Dixon and Rebecca, to answer your question, I don't know why they come at a sister like that, other than to say that even people who are supposed to be on our side have those tendencies. We all have to deconstruct our construction. I'm not saying every time you disagree with a Black person is racist, but all I'm saying is that there are some implicit and explicit biases. There are some things that people react to, and all of us, because we've all been socialized in a nation that says that Black lives don't really matter. And it's not just what is happening in the criminal justice system. It is happening because How many black women have been elected governors in the United States of America? Hello, somebody. How many black men have been elected governors in the state in this country? Hello, somebody. How many black presidents? On and on and on. CEOs of companies, environmental racism, you name it. It is just weaved into all of the system. And so when black people like myself and like yourselves dare to have some agency, folks who are supposed to be on our side try to smack us down. People need to check themselves, as the rapper said, before they wreck themselves. And many of you have seen me debate on TV oftentimes. I'll never forget, this woman had the nerve to tell me on national TV, this white lady, y'all go and check the receipt. I'm having a moment. Said to me, I didn't have a right. I had no, I had no authority, no standing, I think she said, to quote the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Those are just examples. Oh yeah, on national TV, yes, she did. Right on CNN. All I can say is that the black codes are in full effect in the 21st century, and people might want to act like they are not, but they are. And black people are suffering disproportionately. And when you wrap that around others, it's a caste and class situation. So Dixon, I don't know. I mean, that was just a long way for me to say, I don't know why they come at your sister.
Yeah, look, and it was good. You said a lot. Now, one thing I will say, Senator Turner, when it comes to black women, because I know, that is another story for another day, but I still want to touch on that with you. As a black woman in this space who is running on the spirits of our ancestors of Fannie Lou Hamer and Shirley Chisholm, and that's a big deal because you've been locked out of things and talked down to and tried to be blackballed. What keeps you still running and wanting to run? Because when you get into spaces like in these new spaces, and these white women are telling you have no right to quote Dr. Martin Luther King, because that's the Martin Luther King that they created in their heads, right? And they feel like they have the audacity to tell you that. What lets you keep going, especially as a black woman in these spaces, because that is something enough to tear you down.
It is. And thank you for that question, Rebecca. And I do want to recommend a book. Can I pause and recommend a book, The Radical King, written by the one and only Dr. Cornel West. And also people should follow Dr. Bernice King. She sets it straight on Twitter, baby. She lays it out for folks if they really listening about what her mother and her father stood for. Yeah, but you're right. That is the king that they created. What keeps me going is the spirit of our ancestors. What keeps me going are people like my grandmother, who is not as famous as a Fannie Lou Hamer, but for me was my everything. Third grade education, born in 1915, had what we call mother wit. And she would always say to me, baby, you need to be the best. And if you can't be the best, be next to the best, be so close to the best that nobody could tell the difference. She did not let the fact that she was robbed. And what do I mean by that? A black woman born in 1915, dare I say more, she was robbed, but she had a kind of pride and pushed her 7 grandchildren to try to have more than what she was able to have because she was born. James Baldwin has a quote, you were born, basically you treated the way you treated because you were born where you were born for no other reason. I ain't quoting it verbatim, but it's in The Fire Next Time, his book, because you were black. And so we have to deal with white supremacy. We have to deal with systemic racism. We have to deal with anti-blackness. We got to deal with anti-Semitism. We got to deal with homophobia. It's a whole bunch of stuff that we have to deal with in these United States of America. But make no mistake, the foundation of all of those isms is anti-blackness and what was done to our indigenous sisters and brothers. And until we have some truth and reconciliation in these United States of America, we're going to have a repeat. We're going to have to repeat the lesson over and over again. January 6th was just a manifestation of unfinished business in this country. So I'm running, and then Sister Rebecca, what I am a praying woman. God knows I pray, I meditate. I am a preacher's kid. And those are the kinds of things that I lean on in my moments of pain and feeling very overwhelmed. Because again, I'm fighting for justice. It doesn't make me perfect. It doesn't make me infallible. But to have people come at me the way that they do, it's not enough just to disagree with my position. You want to just all out destroy me or destroy our movement. And that's wrong.
That's the thing that gets me in this space, Sister Turner.
It be your own people.
It be your own
people, all skin folk ain't kinfolk, but especially in this regard, like two different things. First and foremost, like we all three of us, all four of us on this on these screens here, we all are people of faith, and if not for our faith, we probably would have tore this place up a long time ago, right? So they better be glad we got the opiate for the masses, because otherwise they wouldn't have a country standing, because they don't deserve one standing. But that's just me. Don't attribute anything that I say it from this point forward to Senator Turner. That's just me being me.
Our views, that like it or not, are our own.
That said, though, it blows me away that it's not good enough for them to try to beat us in the marketplace of ideas. They literally try. And when I say they, you could fill in the blank. White supremacists, yeah. Republicans, conservatives, yeah. Democrats who disagree with our politics, even more so, in a very insidious fashion, attempt to completely destroy us. Yeah. And it does become, it becomes disheartening when you realize that we're out here, like you said, you're just out here fighting for justice. You're out here fighting for what you believe is right. And while you may not get it right all the time, you're fighting for the right thing. But we're going up against a system that is completely antithetical to justice. So how then, when you get into office, how then are you going to continuously fight from within a machine that is designed to not give us justice? What's your strategy when you get in there?
Yeah, well, thank God I've been on the battlefield already. You know, I served as a Cleveland City Councilwoman. I served as a state senator in Ohio, where my Republican sisters and brothers, just by way of example, had a super majority, but I was there standing up nevertheless. And I'm going to do the same thing if I am so blessed when I get to Congress. It is a beautiful thing, though, for progressives, as we are laying out the truth, the whole truth. Maybe we ain't got to nothing but the truth, because they can't handle all of that this morning. But we laying some truths out there. I'm really proud of what this progressive movement has done, despite how the neoliberals tried to destroy. I mean, anyway, I am proud of what the progressives are doing. I mean, you have people like Congresswoman Jayapal, hold it down. Congressman Ro Khanna coming out being very clear. How y'all gonna let a non-elected parliamentarian tell y'all what to do, basically, Senate? You know what I mean? Oh my God. I mean, they are holding it down. Congresswoman Cori Bush, Bowman, Jones, Presley. I mean, you name it. Oh my, baby, just tick it off. We do have an awesome opportunity, because we have more progressives in that Congress in the 21st century in a concentrated way than we have had in a long time. And I firmly believe that if we banty together, baby, we gonna move some mountains in that. We gonna move some mountains in that Congress, baby. They gonna know that the Progressive Caucus is in full effect. And dare I say, can you visualize the Progressive Caucus and the Black Caucus coming together on a justice journey? Mind blown.
They might have to say COINTELPRO after us again.
and it's interesting that you say that too, because it's like, you're talking about uniting in these spaces with us, with people who like us and are for us and things like that. The work can be great. The work can be amazing. But when we talk about and it's not like we want the divide between neoliberals and progressives and things like that. Like, we may not all agree on how to get there, but we're trying to get there. So what happens is, and they don't understand that in these moments, that it's very important not to take the bait from the other side, because that's what's feeding these other people. That makes it look like progressives are being overly radical. They're saying the most, they're doing the most. We have the audacity to attack or hold our presidents accountable. But it doesn't matter who the messenger is. You, Miss Senator Nina Turner, who has an amazing voice, and they know that you are about that life. When you open your mouth, they're like, "Oh no, she's speaking against such and such. Oh, she's a target. She ain't for us." They tried to put out that narrative, and they don't understand they're doing the same thing that these Republicans been doing. Then this is what they want to cause, is division. And you're speaking about unity in such an amazing way. That's all we're trying to do. Now, we ain't got to agree, right? We're gonna agree to disagree sometimes, but we have a bigger picture to focus on. And I think that picture, you have this blank canvas and you are creating something amazing. So
Well,
I'm down.
thank you for that. I appreciate that. And I do want people to go to my website, ninaturner.com. And you know what, we can not a false type of unity. Unity is a two-way street. And it's also an action word, like hope is an action word and love is an action word. And that's really all we are talking about here. Yeah, I am about that life. I am about talking about the people who are suffering in this country. So let's go on and unify around a $15 an hour minimum wage increase, shall we? Let's unify around canceling student debt, shall we? Let's unify around understanding that when you have a discretionary budget of $1.3 trillion and over 50% of that goes to the military industrial complex. Can we just unify around the fact that we could take some of them dollars, since we spend more money than the next 10 industrial nations combined on the military? We have what it takes to be safe. But however, safety also means domestic safety. That means education. That means healthcare. That means dealing with the evictions. That means dealing with changing people's material conditions and not just talking about it, but being about it. Listen, the Democrats, we got what we asked for from the voters. So now it's time for us to deliver. We said, give us the White House. They did. Check. We said, help us to hold the House of Representatives. Check. They did. We said, oh my God, help us win Georgia, baby. And you're going to get that $2,000 check. And then here we are in March, and they still ain't got the $2,000 checks. So let's unify. We can be unified. Let's unify on changing the material conditions of people. And for the next 2 years, Democrats, let's go on and do this thing on behalf of people. That's what we're going to unify. So I can work with anybody. I want people to know this. I feel this in my bones because my proximity to pain is real. I have been a part of the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class. And baby, I will never forget where I've come from. So my proximity to pain is intact. And so I liken this to people being in the middle of the ocean, millions of them saying, save me, I'm drowning. And instead of saving them, you say, I'll be back, we got to go on recess. Instead of saving them, you say the parliamentarian said we can't put $15 an hour, a minimum wage increase, which is the compromise amount, because if the minimum wage had kept up with productivity, baby, it'd be closer to $25 an hour than it is now. Telling people to wait. Why do the poor, the working poor, and the barely middle class in this country have to wait all the time? It is time out for wait. So people are drowning. They're losing their lives and their livelihoods. They are making a choice between, and even when they get that little check, somebody going to be knocking on the door, the electric company, the gas company, the landlord on the door saying, I need my money. It's something wrong. It's something immoral about this predatory capitalism and what is happening. And Democrats have an awesome opportunity and a responsibility to show whose side they really on.
This is where we change. This is where we can definitely, things can start being different. The things that we're asking for, we can see a new America. Literally, this is not impossible for us if we go by and follow these things. This is why we need leaders like her. Understand? I'm not just saying that to say that. I'm not trying to sell her. Did you just hear what she said? These are things that will benefit us. And on that note, my heart and mind is clear.
Sister Rebecca and Brother Dixon, can I just close on two things? And I appreciate you guys giving me the space and the bandwidth, and for us to have sometimes the purge. I mean, we talked about the good and we're talking about some things that people might not want to touch upon and think about. We got to think about it all, the yin and the yang. But I do see that there's promise in the problem. And I run because, when Rebecca, when you ask me, I mean, our ancestors and even people who are living right here today, it ain't just about our ancestors. It's about elders that are living today that can tell a different story about what they had to endure. I'm running for the past. I'm running for the present. And baby, I am running for the future. But there are two quotes that bookend our campaign. And when I say our, I mean this progressive movement, because this is our campaign. One is what Congresswoman Barbara Jordan said. What the people want is very simple. This ain't complicated. They want an America as good as it's promised. That's why I run Medicare for All, canceling student debt, reforming the criminal justice system, not just what's happening in the streets from law enforcement agencies, but it's in the courtrooms, baby. It's the prosecutors we elect. It is all of that. It's the prison industrial complex. All of that matters. It's the environment. It's all of that. So what the people want is very simple. They want an America as good as it's promised. Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. And the other book into it does come from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I don't have this one memorized, but I just want to share this with your viewers. And I'm asking people to listen to this with their heart. He said the following: power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. Baby, this is power and love together. And that is why I am running, to use those two forces in this universe to stand up against anything that is unjust. That's it. And that's all.
Listen, Senator Nina Turner, everybody. Senator Nina Turner.
Joining me now is Ken Klippenstein, who's a reporter for The Intercept, and he is notoriously efficient and effective with the Freedom of Information Act request to get major scoops on all kinds of stories. Ken, first and foremost, thanks for joining us. How are you this morning?
Hey, I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Ben?
Doing great. You dropped a recent article for The Intercept, and the context of it is the Obama administration prosecuting more than twice as many leakers under the World War I era Espionage Act, as well as previous administrations combined. However, the Trump administration blew that number out of the water. Could you talk about what you found with your investigation?
Yeah, what's incredible is that, as you said, the number of individuals who leaked to the press and were prosecuted, not just prosecuted for leaking classified information, but prosecuted under the Espionage Act, which in itself is a very controversial thing to do because, you know, whatever you think of disclosing classified information to the public, to the members of the news media, how is that espionage? You're not selling that to a foreign adversary like Russia or China or Iran. But setting that aside, there was already a record number under the Obama administration, more than twice as many prosecutions of those cases than every preceding administration combined. So a huge number under the Biden administration. And as you say, the Trump administration, they referred even more than the Obama administration did. They referred over 300 cases of classified leaks to the press to the Justice Department for prosecution. So that in itself is an astonishing number. And it suggests that there is a trend afoot. We're going to see how the Biden administration manages dealing with this. But, you know, I cover national security a lot. And even for people that are not leaking classified information, this has the effect of scaring everyone. I have countless examples of people that are just like, oh, God, I don't want to give you a quote. And I say to them, well, this isn't even classified. They're like, well, who knows what could be, you know, there are things that could be retroactively classified, things that everyone knows are classified somewhere on the books, and they could throw the book at you using that. So it has a chilling effect on people being able to talk to the press. And that's really what hurts the.
Yeah, I want to
consuming news, which I hope is. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry about that delay there for a second, but I want to contextualize this a little bit more for the audience, for people who may not understand like how impactful this is for journalism, for reporting, for investigative reporters, for how we find out information about our government. Because the government has the capacity to hide as much as they want to hide. But in addition to hiding things behind the veil of confidentiality, they now are using a very aggressive, and I can't just say now because it's been happening for some time, right? They are aggressively going after not only people who leak information, but now, in a sense, they're trying to instill a fear in journalists from even receiving that information. So could you just break it down to the real practical, why does this matter to somebody on the streets versus the intricacies of it, which are equally as important, but help everyone understand why this matters.
Yeah, so this isn't something that just affects journalists, although, you know, at first glance it might look that way. The quality of the reporting that you're going to get is going to be a lot lower. There's going to be more focus on, you know, palace intrigue. What did Melania say? What did, you know, Jill Biden say? This kind of thing, rather than the really sensitive stuff that gives you insight into What are we doing overseas? How is the war machine being handled? And it's not just military stuff. There are things the FBI has that are classified. There are things law enforcement has that are classified. And as I said before, it's not just classified information. People end up getting the attitude, oh God, this is scary. I don't want to talk to the press at all. So what you end up getting is more puff pieces, more opinion stuff, more things that don't give you an idea of what's going on that's actionable, that police, military, intelligence community might be doing. And all of that stuff is on the rise, not just since 9/11, but now we've got the Capitol thing going on. The riot that took place on January 6th, there's a debate right now about whether they want to pass a new law it's kind of similar to the Patriot Act, where they would be able to designate domestic groups terrorist organizations. And extremely hard, just from my personal experience, to get people to talk about these things because they're so scared of the Justice Department and this sort of machine gun approach they have of referring I said before, over 300 leaks referred to the FBI for investigation and potentially prosecution under 4 years. Bear in mind, that was a one-term administration. So that's more than Obama's 2 terms. So this is clearly on the rise. And again, the effect that has is just shoddier, lower quality, less aggressive reporting all around for anyone to read.
So what they've done is they've relegated us to covering, like you said, the puff pieces versus the things that matter. And if we are really serious about anything that we talk about as progressives, as people who want liberation for all people, domestically and foreign, this strikes at the core of our ability to hold this government accountable. And in your reporting, you said 334 leaks were referred to for FBI criminal investigation underneath the Trump administration. And I know we don't have a crystal ball, but do you think this is going to continue to expand? Because there's an expansion of this, right? There was an expansion underneath Barack Obama. So to me, and then expanded, obviously, even more so underneath Donald Trump. There seems to be a consensus across party lines as it pertains to instilling this kind of fear in not only journalists, but the general public.
Yeah, I think it's certainly possible it'll get worse. Early signs don't look great. I cite in the piece the example that the Trump administration established. They were referring so many of these cases of prosecution to the FBI that the FBI ended up opening a new leaks unit specifically for media leaks. And someone in the former counterintelligence official within the FBI told me that this was set up for all of the cases they were going after because of the Russia investigation. If you want people to stop talking to the press, a good way to do it isn't even necessarily prosecute them, but to just send the FBI in. You start polygraphing people and send the FBI in. You start polygraphing people and interviewing them and threatening them with potential prosecution. That in itself is going to be enough for everyone to be like, "Whoa, we better stop talking to the New York Times for what's going on here." And so I asked the administration now. I asked the FBI, "Did you guys close down that new leak investigations unit?" And they did respond, but they didn't want to comment. They said no comment. And so you can guess what that means. Certainly the trend line is going upwards from not just, Bush was an increase over his predecessor. Obama was a significant increase over Bush. And now we see in one term, Trump's done more referrals than in 2 terms of Obama. So certainly the trend line is not looking good.
And then a couple more questions here, because you've worked for quite a few extremely reputable outlets, right? And everywhere you go, you fight, and your tool is the Freedom of Information Act, right? FOIA requests. Have you seen, and this is not for you to talk about any of your previous employers, but in the industry in general, are these media outlets a little more hesitant and reserved in terms of going after this information because of this escalation? Or are you seeing, I'm hoping, the opposite possibility, which is these outlets are like, no, let's double down and fight even harder? What is kind of the sentiment that you're seeing in the industry?
Well, there is a lot of anxiety. A lot of the bigger news organizations, they have attorneys, and their goal is to minimize risk. And I'll give you an example. There was one big outlet that everyone would recognize. I don't want to name names. That had their legal team sit down their reporters and say, don't tell people to install encryption. And I thought, that's weird. Encryption is a way that you can protect your communications from, penetration, not just from law enforcement, but from foreign intelligence services, hackers, so on and so forth. And I said to my friend, why did they say that? And she said to me, oh, they told us that they're worried that this could be construed as conspiracy. And I said, conspiracy to what? She's like, well, conspiracy to disclose classified information. So it's like the fear was that we're helping somebody in this endeavor of, telling us what's going on. And maybe the Justice Department could say then that we've engaged conspiracy to disclose this information. And that to me sounds crazy. And I mean, that's one example of several that I can mention. But if they're too scared to, install encryption, you can assume that they're going to be nervous about talking and publishing certain things. So it's a very subtle, thing of kind of self-censoring, and some of it may not even be conscious. You may just become more cautious in what you do and say as a consequence of all this.
I just got to emphasize something here. You said that they're even saying don't install encryption on their phones. Like, for example, like don't install the Signal app and communicate that way because then it can be construed. So what do we do? I know like this may not, I don't know if you've thought about this, and I don't know if this is a good question for you, but it begs the question. What the hell do we do when we have this all-powerful, the greatest empire, when I say great, I mean largest and the most abusive empire in the history of the world, having the ability to shut down our one channel of holding them accountable? Like, what do we do in response to this continued crackdown?
Same thing as with anything, register your dissatisfaction, pressure the government, ideally get organized, because what we have now is a sort of dissipated process where people take to online, and I'm certainly part of this too if you follow me on Twitter. But the more organized folks can become, the more they can register that dissatisfaction in a way that's going to impose a political cost on leadership. And above all, I would say too, coming out of the Trump administration, take off those rosy glasses that so many liberals now have about the Justice Department and the FBI, and recognize that maybe they can do some good things. And I do think we need a justice system. I wish it would look different than what it did. But recognize that historically, these agencies have not been on the side of protesters and activists and the like, because we're living in a very scary time when, the half of the country that had been sort of critical of these agencies before now is openly, almost worshiping them, the intelligence services and the law enforcement.
In other words, the FBI is not your friend. Right. That's what the FBI, no matter who's wielding that power, they are not our friends. Ken Clipstein, thanks so much, man, for coming and joining us. Your recent article for The Intercept is the Trump administration referred a record number of leaks for criminal investigation. I suggest everyone go check it out and be aware of what's actually happening to us. Thanks so much for joining us, man.
Great to talk to you, Ben.
And we have Olaimi, I hope I'm saying that right, Olaimi Olorin, who is a public defender at NYC Legal Aid Society, a legal observer at New York City chapter of National Lawyers Guild. She is going to be joining us today. There she is. Let me tell you something. Hold on. This morning, I went to her page, right? And I saw that she was on BNC, the Black News Channel. And I said, give us blonde, ma'am. Give us blonde. Okay, I live for it. Absolutely.
I be switching it out. I like the concept that they can't keep me up the court.
That's right. Okay. That's right, sis. I love it. I was like, okay.
They gotta go with it.
Yes. They might look at you and be assuming, right? And then you come and you're like, I'm educated, and this doesn't matter, right? Because
people like to think you got to change it, and you don't.
Exactly. Right. Because Karen over here and Sarah over here are rocking their reds and their purple highlights and whatever.
Or just looking rough and raggedy.
Rough. Yep. Unkept. But thank you so much for joining us here, Olaimi. Can you introduce yourself and let the people know who you are?
My name is Olaimi Olurin. Y'all could say Olay, make your life easy. I'm from the Bahamas originally. I moved to the U.S. in 2008, and now I am a lawyer here. I'm a public defender working to help Black and brown people combat a racist injustice system.
Okay, girl. See, my Caribbean sister, I'm Haitian, you're Bahamian. We got that connection there. So you're an immigrant yourself, right?
Yes.
Let's just dive right into it. You're an immigrant yourself, and I did see a couple of tweets that you did put out saying, the legal immigration process here in America is super duper tough. And I know because, I'm a product of immigrants myself, and my parents, I got some family members who didn't have the opportunity to come here legally, but I do have my parents who came here legally, and even them getting their citizenship, even them getting papers, even them getting anything legal through the system took years. I'm talking like years, for one person a decade. Just to be considered American or have citizenship or have papers, anything legal. So definitely speak about that process for you. I know you were tweeting about it the other day.
So my parents still live at home in the Bahamas. Actually, I'm the first person in my family to come to the US and the only one for a while. My sisters ended up coming one by one. And I came because I wanted to be a lawyer in America, and I looked into the immigration system when I was like 14. I'm like, all right, if I get in the education system earlier, I get my degrees here, I'm in this community, then it'll be easier for me. I mean, probably easier. That was the right idea. I'm still present, but as far as being able to get citizenship or anything like that, that's still not an option. Still hasn't happened. So I'll be the first, and hopefully eventually I get it, but it just isn't a thing. And people tend to think after you're here for a while, you start to blend in, people think, oh, you're American too. They catch you on the right day. You code switching enough, they're like, oh no, they don't mean you should be straight. Like, I remember I was on 7 months unpaid immigration leave trying to get a visa that I ultimately was denied for. And I remember talking to my own friends. I tell them I'm an immigrant every day. This is the situation. I was talking about it all in law school, and people are just like, you'll be fine. You're a lawyer. They want people like you. They sure did deny me. I was like,
wow.
Yeah, I was blown away because, I did qualify. I applied for an EB2 visa. It's for, an alien with an advanced degree, an outstanding person. I had every letter, reference, every, degrees, all these awards. And they were like, yeah, you have an advanced degree. Yeah, you're an outstanding alien. We give you that. They were like, you want to be a public defender, and that only benefits the poor, and that's not of interest to us. They straight up wrote it. They said the quiet part out loud. I was like,
wow.
Yeah, it hurt. It hurt.
So you couldn't even be considered, an American to help do more work for the people that are here, people that look like you, people that may have issues, anything, because public defender is kind of like the low level.
Which is crazy because, the national interest waiver, what I had applied for, where you're able to apply for yourself, the whole idea is that it's something that is in the interest of the nation, right? I'm the only constitutionally court appointed lawyer. Public defenders are mandated by the Constitution. You would think that counts. Like the court has already decided. I was blown away. I'm like, wow, how's that possible? I live in New York City. I've gotten, 1,000+ people out of jail, and it's wild to really, really hear it and see it. I think to myself, okay, well, I went to school here. I got my high school degree here. I got my bachelor's degree here. I got my JD here. I'm admitted. I passed the bar here. I'm admitted to the state to practice in New York. I haven't lived in the Bahamas for 13 years. I have no degrees there. That's not where I'm at. But yet it really doesn't matter. You can't claim this as your home.
It's amazing that they just outright said this to you.
Yep.
Right. That they said that because of what you're doing. But had you put down there that you're going to be a corporate lawyer,
yeah,
for like a major corporation or whatever, then it's very likely they would have approved you. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. If you could, the thing is, right, they want you. The other option was like, you can demonstrate this huge business plan where you plan on bringing America millions, but you literally can't do that. As an immigrant, I'm not allowed to make any money outside of my job. I can't do that. I can't start a business. I can't collect any money. I can't even start a YouTube paid for subscription. Like I cannot do it. So it's like, I've been here for 13 years being told I cannot make any money. I cannot have a business. Why would I have that plan? You know what I mean? They get you one way or the next. Is basically what it is. You can't. I did everything I was supposed to do. I planned it out 13 years in advance. Like I've been thinking about this since my teen years. It didn't pop up on me. So I'm like, I'm as prepared as I can be. So when that came up, I'm like, I really don't know what else I could possibly have. How could I have a business plan that I'm not allowed to have? I can't start a business there. I can't go get a loan. I can't do any of those things. So why would I have it?
So in your case by yourself, you show that immigration is not only a class issue because of how they have that thing so tangled up that you got to benefit the rich or you can't come, but it's also a black issue. Like this is an issue for us.
It is. No, immigration is a black problem. It just hasn't gotten framed that way, and, unfortunately, as a community, we have so many issues, what I mean, to tend to in terms of this country, in terms of the media cycle. So I see how it happened. But in actuality, despite how the media portrays it, most immigrants here are people who came documented. You know what I mean? They came documented and their visa overstayed. And a lot of immigrants are, in fact, Black people coming from Haiti, coming from the Caribbean, coming from Africa. And these are the places that don't have these immigration carve-outs. So it, in fact, really deeply is a Black issue. People just aren't thinking about you when they see you. Like, I tell people I'm an immigrant all day long, but that's not what they think of when they see me. You know, they remember, they know I'm Black, they know I'm tending to those issues. But as far as being an immigrant, no. And especially with America advertising itself as a melting pot so often, and everybody is, you know, my parent was an immigrant, and this is easy for people to think when you say immigrant, you mean, oh, your parents came here or your family's from here. And I mean, no, I'm from there. I came here. I'm not from this country.
Wow. I absolutely appreciate that story. And first of all, you're on both sides of it, right? You're fighting for people, their rights here in America, right? And they're telling you, I mean, that's low level and you're an immigrant. I mean, it's not really doing anything for us. So, and you can't monetize outside of that to even make it better for you, especially in this time where social media is popping for you to be monetizing on your work. They're just like, you don't deserve because you're an immigrant. Here in America, the melting pot, right? The one where we're supposed to come here as immigrants and say, you know, we've made it. This is where all immigrants can get their dreams to come true. This is the place. And it's like, it's really not, especially, you know, for you, to me, you said like, this is a true hardship that nobody really understands. If you're not an immigrant, or if you're not a product of immigrants, Black folks already got it hard. And like you said a key thing as well. They try to frame it as if immigration isn't a Black issue. And in reality, it is. Like here, if you're Black or brown, that is definitely an issue as an immigrant, because we don't see that with you know, the clear people, with the Europeans or whoever who's coming over here. They get to come here, things are easier for them. The hardships aren't relatable when it comes to them. But when it comes to the Black and brown immigrants, it is definitely really, really tough. So what are some things that you're doing now that are helping get this word out and help people understand what's really happening?
I think it's necessary I talk about it, right? Like, in the 13 years I've been here, I've never really heard that story. I know it well as far as my friends, people I know. Like, I am not the only international student. I know I'm one of the few I know that are left still here. I have Bahamian friends who have been just as qualified and competent, came to America, couldn't stay. Even my own sister. I have a sister who went to undergrad, graduated with all the honors, 3 sisters, you know, couldn't stay here, had to end up going back to the Bahamas. That's where she's in med school. So I know it well like that, but people don't know it. They don't really get to hear it, because the reality is immigrants aren't in the position to tell your story. You're either wrapped up in an immigration fight and you don't want to upset USCIS, right? So you're doing that, or you're out the country. It's only one way or the other. So you don't really get to put that narrative out there. And what happens is people think that the immigration, they think it's like, oh, just do it the right way. If you just do it the right way, just apply. They don't realize you can't apply. They haven't heard that, because the narrative is dominated by people that are intentionally trying to create this appearance that immigrants just don't want to be bothered. They just want to come here illegally. They just want to do it the wrong way. And you never get to hear from other people because they're not in the position to talk. So right now, what I'm just doing is talking, making noise, making sure they know.
So and I know we're talking about the legal immigration side of it, right? But we also have the illegal immigration side of it. And that is also tough, because people, you know, they don't have an opportunity. They have a lot of the walls built, you know, in front of them, where they can't even come to America. And then we have a woman who is our vice president, who's a product of immigrants herself, and who is telling folks, don't come.
That's how it goes. You'd be shocked how often you hear some insensitive immigration comment from someone you think would understand. That's why I plan to keep all my immigration letters to show my future children, they don't know what it is, so they're not saying things like that. But it's always been the case. The narrative is very insensitive. And even myself, right? Even with my own immigration narrative, I'm very privileged, right? I am still someone that was privileged enough to be able to qualify for a student visa to come here. Like that's a picture of privilege. Dixon, my parents sent me to this country, pay for boarding school. That's all very expensive. Just getting the visa, the amount of financial support my parents had to be able to show. So I'm very, very privileged in that. And I'm privileged to still be here. And that being said, I feel like I I owe it to other immigrants like me and other immigrants that haven't been so fortunate and aren't able to be so fortunate. They didn't have the parents to pay for, school 10 years in advance, weren't able to do all of this. I need to talk about that because there needs to be more routes for everybody. Because undocumented, they frame it as two separate immigration issues, and it's not. They're very, very intertwined. How you end up undocumented is because there were no paths for you to be documented.
Yeah.
That's what happens, because if you build your life in a country, you've built your life there. Your community is there, your family, your friends are there, your ability to work, everything is there. And then they up and say, go. It's not that easy. And,
Right.
it really isn't that simple. So I feel compelled to do that for other immigrants.
And we need more people like you, right? Because and I'm not saying that just for a pat on the back. I'm saying you're doing some work, even when they're trying to restrict you from doing the work, because that's how they do it, right?
Yeah.
They're saying, we gave you an opportunity to come to America and get some schooling. That's the crumbs.
Yeah.
Grab that, and I'm glad that you haven't stopped there, because the more that you do the work will help somebody else. Because this immigration issue isn't going to stop. This immigration conversation isn't anything new, but when we highlight it and make it and point out what it really is, and how the only, you said there, when it comes to immigration, when it comes to the legally documented and the undocumented, those are the same. They're both intertwined. I definitely agree with that. But when it comes to the Black and brown immigrants and the others, that's two separate things. That's two separate lanes. And that's, and the fact that you're educating people on that. And then you're the one, and I talked about this yesterday on our show. It's so good to hear it coming from somebody who is experiencing it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That is where it makes it, well, how do you know? Because you just said like there are so many professionals or people that you wouldn't even think would be on the wrong side of the immigration conversation, but yet they are, right? And then here you are, who've experienced it, and like, no, these are the issues, and this is what's happening, and and this is just there's so much. That immigration conversation is so broad.
Yeah.
It's so much going on. There's so many layers to it, but right here, this particular portion is about you, an immigrant who came here, and there's so much like you who come here for the opportunities and who are blessed, when in comparison to our immigrant brothers and sisters who don't get the opportunity, and then still told you can't get nothing else. It's not here for you.
Yep.
Unless you're willing to not help the people.
And I can't do that.
Yeah.
I can't do that. I might not have been aware of it when I first came to the country, but at some point in time, me personally, I can't be a Black attorney and not do things that I think are going to advance Black people. It's not going to work for me.
Come on, somebody.
Yeah, come on, somebody. You are a Black attorney, and that to me, I was saying yesterday, Black women, Black women. Listen, ain't nobody gonna. They try to minimize it. When we say attorney, that's something big, right? Especially in the Caribbean community. You're an engineer, you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're a nurse, and you have made it. Okay, you are there, and nobody can take that away from you. And you're doing the work. So, what can we expect next from you during this journey for you?
Let me tell you, I'm just going to continue showing up in Queens every day. Every time there's somebody that needs me, I'm going to continue representing them. I'm going to continue advocating for them. And I'm going to continue saying the things that people are scared to say. I think the benefit to my career is this. I'm not from here, and I really have no ability to, like you said, I can't monetize certain things. All I really care about doing every day is fighting for people that need me to. So that's what I'm going to do every day in, day out. So I'll continue doing this.
Listen, for everybody who's watching, definitely let them know how to catch you, how to support you, because if anything, if we can't, if you can't monetize, I want people to push your work. And we'll hopefully, that pushes the coins your way, because you deserve, sis. So definitely plug in where people can find you.
Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter, any social media at Miss Olurin, MSOLURIN, and check out right now. I'm publishing a series. I thought it was important that I amplify the voices of people actually in the criminal system. Too often we hear from judges and lawyers and people that actually experience it. If we want to know what's wrong with the criminal system. We should be talking to the people that are actually being impacted and caught up in it. So I'm publishing the stories of people that are formerly and currently incarcerated, 5 stories one at a time. So look out for that.
Oh, we need that. We need clips of that. We want to play that on this show because that's another important conversation. You see, Ole, you over here giving us a little bit more. See, I told you, Black women, that is a conversation we have to about people who have been incarcerated and how they trying to come into the world and what their story is, because the assumption is that that's reform when they're incarcerated, right? And they push them out into the world and they don't even how do they adjust? And
exactly.
Bring us that. We need those. We need those clips, girl.
I got you, and I'll send you the links. People like to talk too much for currently and formerly incarcerated people. There's this narrative that they're voiceless. They're not voiceless. I might, as a lawyer, it might be my job to speak for them in the courtroom because they don't speak the language, and it's the system, operates by forcing people to have to deal with the abuse silently in court. But outside of court, they have a voice. The only thing is people aren't listening. So I think people like me have an obligation to amplify their voice, and I didn't think it was sufficient for me to have a platform, where people think it's insightful to hear my little secondhand glances at the system. Well, why not hear it from the people who really know? Hear from them, hear from their family, their experiences. You're moved by my little testimony and looking at it in court, but go ask them. They got the real story. So I think it's important I share that.
Girl, okay, yeah, we're bringing you back. It's already done. It's already said and done. You're doing the work, and you're doing more work on top of the work. Yeah. Not only in immigration for the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. Girl, you on the streets. Your boots on the ground. It comes in many forms, and you are boots on the ground. Keep doing what you're doing. Make sure you guys follow Ole. And let's get her Twitter handle up on here and your Instagram as well. You said what were you put it up?
Sam, I'm Miss O'Laurin on everything.
Okay, perfect. And we're definitely going to get everybody to follow you in your work. Bring those clips on over, and we're going to have you back on the show. Promise.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
All right, enjoy the rest of your day, girl.
I'm always pleased to be joined by brilliance, and brilliance that is also wrapped in love. I want to introduce to our show for the first time, Marianne Williamson, who is an American author, spiritual leader, political candidate, and activist. She has written 13 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers, and she most famously and recently ran for president in the Democratic primaries of 2020. Sister Williamson, thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Oh, I'm good, thank you, and thank you so much for having me on.
The pleasure is ours. I want to begin with just who you are. And I know most people watching this absolutely already know who you are, but just in context of the reason I reached out to you, I see you talking all the time about the hard issues. And then you also talk about the need and the necessity for love in the midst of these very difficult issues. If you're like me, that probably is difficult when you consider how fatuous and ridiculous American politics can actually be. So let me just start with the $1 million question. How do you balance maintaining love in a system that's so full of hate?
Well, if a system is full of hate, that means it needs love. I mean, if you're a doctor and somebody comes in with a wound, the doctor doesn't say, oh, that's so negative. It's so awful. You have a broken leg, but let's look at your elbow. If a system is filled with hate, it needs healing that much more. It needs the consciousness of that which is reparative that much more. So I look at something that is deeply corrupt and I think we need to go there. I don't look at something that's corrupt and think let's avoid it because it won't get less corrupt. It is, inertia means the tendency of the object to move in whatever direction it's been moving until a direction of a counterforce. We can't look at the corruption and the toxicity and the genuine danger, potential danger of the current system and as a generation turn away and then die happy. It can't happen.
Right. I can't possibly, I say it all the time, it's like, I can't die yet. I gotta live because if I can't die happy knowing I'm living a broken system for my children and their children and their children. And if we're lucky, that we would have that kind of future. But we're in a system now that most certainly is on a collision course with disaster because it's rooted in things not just like hate, but rooted in greed. And part of your campaign really was speaking to that issue of greed and how it is breaking us and how it is breaking people. Talk about your campaign and how you came in certainly differently. You came in speaking differently. You were addressing issues. Matter of fact, you were one of the first people, if not the first person, to mention reparations on those debate stages. And you just came for it all. Tell us about that process and equally as important, the kind of pushback that the system gave you.
Well, the pushback the system gave me is very much aligned with what you were talking about a few minutes ago before I came on. The system has a pre-prescribed conversation, and it also has a pre-prescribed group of candidates that it has allowed into what it believes should be deemed qualified. And that has to do with people whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the system that drove us into this ditch. The idea is that they're the only people qualified to lead us out of the ditch. So I did come in talking about things that everybody I know talks about. The fact that economic values have at this point replaced humanitarian values, that capitalism has become, over the last 40 years, so untethered to ethical consideration as to be a serious danger to life among people in our country, people in the world, and the planet itself. That this absolutely must change, or we are on our way to global calamity, the likes of which we are already flirting with. But the system, the political media industrial complex, and I think you were referring to that as well, they're not disconnected. They clearly are a boys club that work together. They won't have it. And if you seek to challenge it, they have their ways of dealing with you.
No. Yeah, they have a big, broad tool set that they can use. And the very first line in their defense to protect this system from the people is that media industrial complex. The last line is the military industrial complex. If they just have to wield it out on us, they will. Would you speak then, because there is an undertone. One of the reasons I think I connect with what you say so much is because the things that you say actually connect to how we survive as a species, how we survive in I want to say in perpetuity, because what we're doing right now is a recipe. I think people don't believe that this could be the last generation. I think people take for granted that our children's generation could be the last generation, but the way that we're behaving ourselves collectively, the way that we're engaging in this greedy system, the way we engage in these endless wars is a recipe, and the way we just completely disregard the environment is a recipe for our destruction. But I feel that one of your messages is how do we survive as a species? Could you speak on that?
Well, I totally agree with you. We are carrying on with a naive arrogance, forgetting the lessons of history. The lessons of history demonstrate that there have been great civilizations that have crashed and burned. And our civilization can crash and burn. We are collectively demonstrating behavioral patterns that are maladaptive for our survival. And in our case, not only the survival of our civilization, but as you say, of the species itself. And we all learned as children about how evolution works. The species will either evolve in such a case, will either mutate in such a case, or it goes extinct. Now, I do believe that which represents an evolutionary alternative, that which represents the collective mutation, is present among us. And I believe the people of this country, and I believe the people of the world, there is a critical mass of people. You can feel it. It's an aspirational yearning that is demonstrating itself everywhere. New ways of agriculture, new ways to deal with food, new ways to deal with economics, new ways to deal with business, new ways to deal with medicine. It's there. The problem we have is that the economic and political systems that dominate our political and geopolitical realities are stuck in the regressive mode of behavior. And they form as they are at present an obstruction when the entire purpose of the political institutions is to be a conduit for solutions.
Yes.
And that's where we are right now. And that's why so many of us are screaming as loud as we can.
Absolutely.
So, Ms. Williamson, my question to you would be, I know that you spoke about like in these times, you know, to combat the negativity and the toxic is to show love and to instead of run away from it, go towards it. It's pretty hard, especially as a person of color, a Black person right now in the country to, you know, see it through that mindset, especially in these moments. So it's what else would be another option? Like, especially because mentally we're broken and there's always something coming up. The system is against us. You know, we have this whole COVID-19 pandemic. It's against us, with us being the least to get the help and the assistance that we need. It's a lot. So, you know, it almost sounds like it sounds good. I remember when I used to walk in that where it'd be like, you know, love on it. But some people are just so mentally worn out and torn and just can't see it that way. So what would be another option? You know what I mean?
Well, first of all, we were talking a moment ago about the lessons of history. Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. have already created the template that you're asking for. We don't have to create any new wheels here. It's the idea that we ourselves have to practice the love that we want to see dominate the world. On the other hand, love involves truth-telling. I heard you a few minutes ago. There was no lack of love in what you were saying. You were simply stating the truth. It's stating the truth, standing for justice, refusing to tolerate it, but without personally demonizing anyone. We can critique the system without personal demonization. And I think a lot of people are doing that right now, and that includes you. So, and is it difficult? Of course it's difficult. It was difficult for the abolitionists. It was difficult for the women suffragettes. It was difficult for the civil rights workers. But to you, Rebecca, I remind you also, we're American women. We're not porcelain dolls. These are troubled times. These are tough times. And I really believe that this is really a time to look deeply at our ancestors. Yes, there are ancestors who were murderers and slave owners and the worst of the worst. But we also have ancestors who were liberators. We also have ancestors who repudiated that, who pushed back, who carried humanity forward. And I think we're living at a time when, as important as it is to identify the problems in the past, we need to identify with the problem solvers. And yes, they were stressed, and yes, they were anxious, and yes, clearly they would have been traumatized, but they continued. They continued to walk, they continued to push, and I think that's what we're doing. And I think also we're doing it together. I think in a way, we need to maybe in a certain way give ourselves a little more credit than we're giving ourselves. A lot of people are rising up right now too, and trying to own our yes and own our no. Absolutely no, you cannot continue to do this to our children. You cannot continue to do this to our people. You cannot continue to do this to our planet. That doesn't mean I don't love you. But as Martin Luther King said, God said I have to love my enemies. He didn't say I have to like them.
Come on, somebody. Come on, somebody. I want to ask you about that duality. Do you find ever that in your walk of love in these political spaces is matched by an equal amount of rage at the amount that our system just devastates human life? The complete and utter disregard for human life in the global South, the complete disregard for what's going on in Yemen, the casual disregard for the 22 lives that just were taken in the airstrikes in Syria. Like, I find that the more I love, the angrier I get at this system. What is that duality for you?
To me, it's like when you look at an Olympic level athlete, let's say an Olympic level, or let's say a tennis player at a place like Wimbledon, and that tennis player drops a ball, making a mistake they haven't made since they were 12 years old. They do not have the luxury of spending a fraction of a second going, oh, damn, they can't, they got to keep. We don't have the luxury. So yesterday, for instance, I watched a few minutes of President Trump's speech. I saw all of those people standing up, going crazy excited at the idea of his running a third time. I definitely know that that would be a path to fascism in America. And I felt the emotions, everything you're saying. and discipline. Just the word disciple and the word discipline come from the same place. Marianne, no time. Every moment you spend going into anger or fear is a moment you should spend articulating the alternative, organizing for the alternative, inspiring and motivating for the alternative. Don't let it drag you in. In the Course in Miracles, it says, look at the crucifixion, but don't dwell on it. Look at it, know it's there, be informed, and don't spend one more moment leaking your energy and giving it to that, because your energy is so needed right now to create the alternative that will carry the day and take humanity in a different direction.
Whew, oof. One last question from me. And because I have probably 1,000 questions, we could probably talk about this stuff for days. You came out very boldly for reparations, which is something that, you know, has been a pawn in the hands of a lot of politicians, including the Democratic Party. But you were unequivocal about descendants of enslaved Africans in this country being owed reparations. Could you just speak about your conviction around that issue and in any pushback that may have caught you off guard around pushing that issue?
My political views, as all of my views, rest on a foundation of spiritual principle, because I believe that spirituality is not just a different category of life, it is the underpinning, that which connects us to our deep humanity. Yeah. And a universal spiritual theme in all the great religious and spiritual systems is atonement. You can't move forward in life if you don't clean up the past. Whether it's Catholics going to confession or Jews on the day of Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year is the Day of Atonement. In Alcoholics Anonymous, you have to admit your character defects. You have to own it where you've been wrong, and you've got to make it right. Yeah. So the more I studied about American history, I was writing a book called Healing the Soul of America in the late 90s. And I took a deep dive into American history more than I had before. I was already a liberal on social justice issues, including race. I was raised in that kind of a home. But the more I studied about American history, the more I got, whoa. And I saw that there's no way that the United States can go forward and have the life we want until we not only atone, but make amends. Now, in terms of the atonement, I had written a book at the end of the 90s, Healing the Soul of America, including talk about how we needed reparations. And in my own work, I was already leading all over the country, not only racial healing circles, but these ritualized prayers where white people would apologize to Black people, and some very powerful things happened. But the more time went on, the more I realized, if you owe me $1,000, as much as I would appreciate the apology, I'd also like my money back.
Come on, somebody.
So I realized at a certain point, we can talk about white privilege all we want, but take a stand here. And for that matter, I'll tell you something else about reparations. We don't need another study.
Come on.
We know what happened. We don't need more evidence. We're going to have a bill to collect evidence. We know we have the evidence. It's right in front of us. It's time to put money on the table and to begin negotiations. So I was very clear about that. And this was one of the reasons why I ran. I definitely noticed that the conversation, as soon as I mentioned it on the stage, somebody came in and said, oh, we won't be talking about that. But to be honest, it was a woman of color who did that.
And that's exactly.
That doesn't shock me. Look, that doesn't shock me at all. I'll say, Ben hit it right on the head. I was going to ask you about reparations and what that process was like for you. But for you, I think it's considered radical when you talk reparations, okay? And especially not being a Black person and being for that. And it's almost where if you speak about it, you know that your possible campaign can be doomed. But you still stood on that because you believe that. And you know what's